We spent the week tweeting and on Facebook asking fans to send in questions that we would ask you today. And we want to do that and just talk a little bit about Kaleidoscope. We know the record is coming out in January, but we were wondering if you could just... It's abstract to talk about music, but again, we're prog fans, so we're very interested in getting some details about...
I can tell you lots of details.
So, if you don't mind, why don't we go song by song? The album opens with a track, with a 25-minute track, Into the Blue. What can you tell us about Into the Blue?
Into the Blue. Yeah, I was listening to Into the Blue yesterday. I've just started learning the songs, you know, bass lines and things. Although I sort of know them, I've got to learn to play it all note perfect. Into the Blue is...
Sorry, it's my fault. Go ahead.
What is that? I know that.
It's my phone. The Nokia tone.
Oh, it's the Nokia tone. That's right. I used to have a Nokia. Yeah. I learnt that actually. I learnt that because Mark, our keyboard player, he used to have that tone, and so I actually learnt to play it on the piano because it was always so annoying because his phone was always going off in the studio. So.
Well, now it went off in the interview. So there you go.
First question. Well, first of all, what I'd like to say about the album actually is that I think, considering where we were when we ended the Whirlwind, which I thought was a pretty complete project, I thought it was a very well put together, piece, conceptually and everything. And I always thought, what are we going to do after that? And having gone back to the kind of traditional Transatlantic format of having 2 long songs, you know, the Yes format, if you like. Yeah. The classic Yes format was 2 long songs and 2 or 3 short songs in the middle, probably written by individuals. But having gone back to that format, I think that what we've managed to do is to keep the sense of construction and fullness, if you like, that we had in the Whirlwind with all of the songs. So Into the Blue and Black as the Sky, which is a slightly longer song as well, and also Kaleidoscope, I think are very complete pieces of music. I think they're actually, you know, very well constructed, considering the time we give ourselves, which is quite ridiculous, really. Yeah, we give ourselves 10 days to kind of couple together, decide what we want to record, put it all together, demo it, and then go and record it properly. And at the end of that, we ended up with the bass and the drums. And then everything else was put on top. So considering the way we work, I think that it's a very complete album, and I think it's not moved on from the Whirlwind. I don't think it can be. I don't think it's bettered the Whirlwind, because I don't think you can. But what it has done is shown the other side of what we do. You know, the shorter songs as opposed to one complete piece. It's shown that we've sort of grown in our construction and our, you know, and our writing abilities as well, and the strengths that we give, you know, that we all bring a lot to the table. It seems to get better every time, which is great. You know, it's the way you want to be. You want to be moving upwards and onwards as opposed to sticking to your laurels, which would be quite easy for us to do, I suppose. I suppose you would look at us and think, well, they've got a formula, you know, that we could stick to that, but we constantly try not to. I think just as creative people, you don't want to do that. You want to be moving on and looking at exciting new things that you can bring. So that's the first thing I'd like to say. I think it sits favourably with the Whirlwind, which I always thought was going to be a tough thing for this album to do. So I'm very pleased about that. And I think all of the albums, what are we starting with? Into the Blue. Into the Blue was, there's quite a lot of Neil in Into the Blue. There's quite a lot of Neil's writing. But I think both the long songs have got some quite good heavy sections in them, which are probably more Roiner. Roiner tends to come up with some of the heavier stuff, as you can imagine. Being a guitarist, it's just, you know, they do that, guitarists.
They like that.
Yeah, they do like a bit of heavy stuff. Especially, you know, from Sweden as well, what do you expect?
With Gildenlow now in the mix,
yeah,
too.
Exactly, yeah. They, you know, as I said, you know, fourth album in, we kind of, I suppose, when we write, we all write separately and then bring our music together. So when we're writing, we're aware of kind of what we're writing around and who we're writing for. That's much more. I always have that in the back of my mind, particularly much more these days. I'm aware of what music I have kicking around that I think that would fit quite well with, or oh, Neil would quite like this, or like, oh, I can see Royner kind of digging into this bit, and you know, whatever. Mm-hmm. So the music tends to marry itself together quite easily, I think, with this album. And I think the other thing with this album is that the heavier sections are sounding much more convincing as well. And I thought, and just as a general consensus, really, a general feel was that the vibe was really, really strong. We'd waited 2 years to do this album. So when we eventually all got together in Nashville, it was like, wow, we've actually already achieved something. We're all in the same place, you know, which was a nice way to start, a good way to start, a good positive attitude. And I thought everyone was playing really well as well. Everyone's playing was fantastic. Everyone seemed to be in good kind of shape, good frame of mind, you know, it came together. As always, it's hard work, but it came together quite well, quite nicely, you know, quite formulated.
One of your fans here asked, maybe this is a good place to start a fan question.
Okay.
He wants to know if you can talk a little about the creative process within Transatlantic. How has it evolved from the first album to this new Kaleidoscope project?
Yeah. Well, the first album, nobody knew each other. You know, the first album was definitely everybody just getting to know each other. Neil had written a bunch of stuff. I didn't come up with too much. I mean, I did in the session, but I hadn't pre-written any music because I didn't really know what my role was in that album. In fact, I actually, before the album, I spoke to Mike about whether I was the right person to play the bass on because I'd listened to Neil's demos and I'd listened to Royner's, and it's like, well, these guys are kind of, there's lots of riffs and there's lots of strange stuff going on, and I just really, my strength, one of my strengths is really a melodic sense, a sense of melodic composition within the kind of bass and rhythmical drum kind of side of things. I like to kind of tie what's going on rhythmically in with what's going on melodically up above. So, and I also try and write bass lines that you can just listen to. Because one of the things I used to love about Squire and about Rutherford was that you could actually, you know, I could anyway, but I guess I was learning to play them. But I could listen, I could quite happily just zone into the bass lines and be really happy just listening to the bass lines. And they made sense to me, and they were very melodic to me. Same as McCartney. I always thought McCartney was very melodic as well. And that's where I started really as a bass player. You know, especially around Rubber Soul and Revolver, ridiculously melodic bass lines going on there. And interesting stuff, new stuff for bass players as well, I thought. So that's what I thought my role would be within Transatlantic when I first joined. And then over the years I brought more music along because I had more music. And after the first album I thought, actually I've only contributed like 2 things to this, so maybe next time, you know. And we didn't all necessarily trust each other, particularly Neil really didn't trust the rest of us because he'd never been in a position where he could, I suppose. He was so used to being the leader, I suppose, of Spock's beard and writing most. I guess I always assumed he wrote most of the material, whether that's true or not. I think he probably did, though, in the early days of Spock's beard. And he was expecting to be doing that with Transatlantic because he didn't know whether Royner and I would A, bring any music, and B, would it be kind of good enough for what he thought Transatlantic would be, and then he found, and I think then we all found out that we all had strengths, and we made a very good album, and we could actually learn from each other's strengths and learn to trust each other's judgments. Because the first album, there was definitely a sense of no one quite sure of anybody else, and not happy to let go what they knew, what they, you know, if we all wanted to be making sure that we covered everything in case other people didn't, and other people were kind of had weaknesses later on. But we quickly found after the recording of the first album and the way it turned out in the mixing, that we were all actually very prolific, what's the word I'm looking for? We were all very competent in what we could achieve and what we could do, and our musicality was much closer than we suspected, you know, and so from then on we started to trust each other more. We started to want to use each other's music more. You know, the first album, Neil definitely didn't want to let go of any of the stuff in his All of the Above, because he felt, well, what would we replace it with? If we replace it with something of Royna's or something of Pete's, will it be as good as what I've already written? Because I've already written stuff that I know works. You know, there was a sense of that. With the following two albums, or particularly Bridge Across Forever, there was definitely a sense of, well, you know, everyone is good at what they do. Everyone's bringing good music in here. We all sent lots of music files to each other in advance, and we knew what we all liked and we knew what the strengths were by then. And then with the Whirlwind, we got to a point where we could just have fun with each other as well, and we could start saying, well, yeah, are you sure? Haven't you got anything better than this, though? Because
finally, you know, after 3 albums.
But I bet you've got something even better than this. And so every now and again someone said, well, we could do this then, you know. Rather than just say, that's good, let's use that, we'd say, well, that's really good, but what would you do if you were going to better it, you know? So we would, because our characters had grown, and the friendship had grown as well.
You became a band, I guess.
That much time away from each other, it was kind of really cool to get back together, and it was nice to have Neil back, you know, wanting to be doing what he's great at, actually. Mm-hmm. I think with a lot of musicians, I think strengths, I tend to think, well, maybe this is just me being biased because this is the way I like to work, but I tend to think people's strengths are better when they're working in collaborations, because
sure.
Sometimes you can be a bit blinded by all of your own stuff, you know. And so it was great to have, you know, great for Neil to want to come back and be back in Transatlantic. We felt that was a really strong place to be at the time, and the Whirlwind proved that, really, because it was a phenomenal piece. You know, conceptually. It was Neil's. Neil already had a very long piece of music called The Whirlwind, but you know, carrying on from Bridge Across Forever, we all contributed and changed things, and then we would just come up with stuff on the fly. And that's another really cool thing, is that, I mean, not that we're ever stuck for things to do, because everyone has, you know, 10 extra ideas in the back of their mind that they haven't managed to get to the table yet. So whenever there's a lull, or whenever there's I'm wondering whether this works, what should we, there's always everyone's hands, you know, like, yeah, me, I've got another 5 ideas I'd like to choose, you know, try out here. And then sometimes we will just naturally start creating from scratch, you know, and jamming on stuff. And that can be cool too. And yeah, and so now we're at a point where it's all very natural, and it all seems to happen. It appears to happen quite easily. Of course, you know, there's nothing ever happens easily. But my memories of this album were, wow, that wasn't anywhere near as tough as I remember. I was expecting it to be, you know, because I was thinking, God, you know, the Whirlwind has been so well thought of and so kind of well recognised in the press and everything, and that how would we, where would we start, and would what we do be better? And you know, I think we're in a good position. I think it's a strong thing we've just come up with.